Hey Goblin, you've been really practicing those war drums.
I'll bring the generic Goblin noise!
This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. with free weekly content and free shipping on orders over $150. You can save 5% site-wide by using the promo code MTGMudsta. If you're looking for a direct way to help the channel, please consider joining my Patreon and becoming a member of the generic Goblin gang. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game finds Charles, Corwin, and Fred rejoining me, and I've decided to play Krenko because I love me some goblins. My opening hand has an Ashnod's Altar, Dockside Extortionist, Impulsive Pilferer, 3 Snow-Covered Mountains, and a Castle Embereth. Charles is playing his Chulane Group Hug deck, keeping Dictative Karametra, Intrepid Hero, Adakar Wastes, Mana Confluence, Forest, and a Noble Hierarch. Corwin is playing his Xyris deck, also keeping an Ashnod's Altar, a Mana Drain, Rejuvenating Springs, Island, Niv Mizzet, and a Riverglide Pathway. Last but not least, Fred is playing Empress Galina, keeping 3 Snow-Covered Islands, Thrumming Stone, Cage Sun, Fierce Guardianship, and a Persistent Petitioner. Charles wins the die roll and starts us off. He plays a Forest and taps it for a green, casting Noble Hierarch. Corwin plays a Rejuvenating Springs, and then pays 1 for a Stoneforge Masterworks. I've also got a turn 1 play, playing a Snow-Covered Mountain into an Impulsive Pilferer. Fred just plays a Snow-Covered Island. Charles has an Adakar Waste for turn, and he hits Fred for 1. In his second main phase, he casts Oath of Druids and passes. Corwin gets an Oath of Druids trigger, revealing until he hits a Murkfiend Liege and puts it into play and draws. He then plays a Lava Glide Pathway and pays 2 for a Goblin Bombardment. I draw and play Castle Embereth. I then pass to Fred after that. Fred gets an Oath trigger and reveals until he hits a Persistent Petitioner. He then plays a Snow-Covered Island and casts another Persistent Petitioner before passing to Charles. Charles gets an Oath trigger on his upkeep and goes deep, revealing until he hits a Progenitor Mimic, and he has it come in as a copy of the Murkfiend Liege. He then plays out a Mana Confluence, and then pays enough for an Intrepid Hero and passes to Corwin. Corwin untaps and gets the Oath trigger, revealing to a Grand Architect. He draws for turn and plays an island and then casts a Growing Rites of Itlimoc. He unfortunately whiffs on the trigger and then taps 2 blue creatures thanks to the Architect to help cast an Ashnod's Altar. He then passes, untapping his creatures on my untap step. I get an Oath trigger this time, and I reveal until I hit a Goblin Recruiter. This lets me tutor a Goblin Ringleader, Conspicuous Snoop, Goblin Chieftain, Goblin Trashmaster, and Skirk Prospector onto the top of my library in the order of my choice. I then draw for turn and play a Snow-Covered Mountain. I cast a Dockside Extortionist, which, after counting up the artifacts and enchantments, gets me 5 treasures. I then cast an Ashnod's Altar, and sacrifice the Dockside, and then the Impulsive Pilferer, getting a treasure token as the Pilferer dies, and floating 4 colorless mana. I use a treasure and some colorless to cast the Ringleader, revealing the top 4 goblins that I recently put on top. I then cast a Conspicuous Snoop, but forget to reveal my top card, and pass after that. Fred gets his Oath trigger, hitting another Persistent Petitioner, and then draws for turn. He plays a Snow-Covered Island, and then taps 3 mana for Propaganda, which is probably a good idea considering my turn. Charles gets a token copy of the Murkfiend Liege on his upkeep, and then draws. He then loses 1 to the Confluence to help cast a Druid of Purification. It enters, and we all go around the table picking an artifact or an enchantment, and he starts us off by picking the growing rights. Corwin picks my altar, and I pick Corwin's growing rights again to show that I'm not the bad guy at the table, while Fred picks Corwin's altar. Those then get destroyed, and after that, Charles activates his hero to target the Mercfiend Liege on Corwin's side. With a trigger on the stack, Corwin in response sacrifices it to the Goblin Bombardment, dealing 1 to the hero to take it out. Moving to combat, Charles swings the Progenitor Liege at Corwin and deals 6. Corwin decides to skip his Oath trigger and draws for turn, and then taps the Grand Architect to cast a Gruul Signet. He passes after that. This time around, I get an Oath trigger, and I reveal until I hit a Dark Dweller Oracle. I play a Snow-Covered Mountain, and then cast a Goblin Warchief. At this point, I remember to reveal my top card, and it's a Heraldic Banner. I pass to Fred after that. Fred gets an Oath trigger, and hits another Persistent Petitioner. He plays a Snow-Covered Island, and then taps 2 to cast yet another Petitioner. He passes after that. Charles gets his Oath trigger on his upkeep, revealing until he hits Selvala, Explorer Returned. He also makes another copy of the Mercfiend Liege, and then moves to draw, and then moves to his main phase. He plays a tapped Spara's Headquarters, and then moves to combat. He swings 2 of the Mercfiend Liege tokens at me, dealing 16. He then moves to his second main phase, and casts a Jace's Archivist. But Corwin responds to that with a mana drain, countering it and getting a delayed trigger to gain some mana in his main phase. With nothing else, Charles passes. Corwin resolves his Oath trigger, revealing until he hits Azuri, Claw of Progress. He then draws and gains the Colorless in his main phase from the mana drain. He uses that mana to help cast Niv Mizzet the Firemind, and then taps the Architect to make some colorless mana to help equip the Stoneforge Masterworks onto Niv Mizzet. I also get an Oath trigger, and I reveal until I hit a Goblin Lackey, and then draw for turn. In my main phase, I cast Krenko. I also remember to reveal my top card thanks to the Snoop, revealing a Mind Stone, and then cast a Skirk Prospector. I tap Krenko since the Warchief gives them much needed haste, making 8 Goblin tokens. I sacrifice some of them to the Skirk Prospector to help cast a Goblin Engineer, who upon entering, lets me tutor 4 and then bin a Thornbite Staff. I then sacrifice the Ringleader for a red to the Skirk Prospector and activate the Engineer, sacrificing a treasure token to bring back the staff. I then sacrifice more tokens to move the staff onto Krenko. Responding to this, Fred taps some Persistent Petitioners to mill Charles for 12 cards. With that on the stack, Corwin responds once he gains priority and uses Goblin Bombardment, sacrificing Azuri to ping the Skirk Prospector and stop my potential infinite combo. Charles then mills his 12, and the staff is then equipped. I then sacrifice a token to the Dark Dweller, exiling my top card, which is a mountain, and I play it for turn. This also lets me untap Krenko, and I pass after that. Fred reveals another Petitioner from the Oath trigger, and then plays Manamo in his main phase after drawing for turn. He casts Empress Galina, and with nothing else, passes. Charles reveals from his Oath trigger until he hits an Esper Sentinel. He then makes another Mercfiend Liege token and draws for turn. He activates Selvala in his main phase, and he sees 3 lands and Vigor, gaining 1 green mana and 1 life. With Corwin drawing a card, he has Niv Mizzet ping 1 to the Esper Sentinel. Charles then plays a Sea of Clouds for his land for turn, and moving to combat, swings 3 Mercfiend Leeches at Corwin. Corwin blocks one with Niv-Mizzet, but still drops to 14 after the other two connect. Charles then passes and gets to untap his creatures with Corwin's untap step. Corwin reveals until he hits a Zenith Chronicler to the Oath trigger and puts it to the field. He draws for turn, but isn't happy with it as he's looking for an answer to my board. Charles offers to help by activating Selvala again, and we all reveal our top cards and then draw them, with Charles gaining 4 green and gaining 4 life. It's not an answer though, so Corwin just plays an island for turn, and then taps enough to bring out Xyris. He then taps the Architect to equip the Stoneforge Masterwork onto his commander, and passes. During his end step, I activate Krenko to make some tokens, and then sacrifice one of them to the Dark Dweller, exiling my top card, but more importantly, untapping Krenko again before tapping him once more to make even more tokens. I draw for turn, and reveal Muxus off the top. I play a Snow-Covered Mountain for turn, and then pay 3 mana for a Goblin Trashmaster. I activate Krenko to make a bunch more tokens, and sacrifice one of them to the Oracle, untapping Krenko and exiling Muxus. I then do the loop again, activating Krenko, making more tokens, and sacrificing one to the Oracle to exile my top card and untap Krenko. I move to combat and swing like 60 goblins apiece at Corwin and Charles, but Fred gets spared because unfortunately I can't pay for propaganda. Before damage, Charles uses Selvala to try and draw a fog, but fails to find one. Corwin does go out swinging though, sacrificing the 3 snake tokens he just made to the bombardment to take out the Trashmaster, and then his other creatures to take out Krenko. However, this does give me a bunch of activations with Krenko, and I make a bunch of tokens thanks to the Thornbite Staff untapping him over and over again, and the Trashmaster and Krenko then get taken out. In my second main phase, I play a Mutavault and pass. During my end step, Fred taps enough petitioners to mill me for 12. Fred draws and plays a Snow-Covered Island. He pays 4 to make 2 more petitioners, and passes. I untap and draw for turn. I equip my Goblin Engineer with a Thornbite Staff, and then sacrifice a token to the Oracle, exiling my top card and getting an untap trigger from the staff. Responding to the untap trigger, I activate the Goblin Engineer and sacrifice the staff to swap it for Ashnod's Altar in my yard, and then untap the Engineer. As I have so many tokens at this point, I need only swing a lethal amount at Fred, and sacrifice the same amount to make colorless needed with Ashnod's Altar, and I win the game. Game review time. So, Krenko is a force to be reckoned with, and I hit a lot of really good lines in this game. I got very lucky with that early Goblin Recruiter, allowing me to set up my top deck, and the Goblin Engineer is just such a workhorse in this deck, allowing me to swap out dead artifacts for critical ones like the Thornbite Staff. I thought for sure I had the game early on, but Corwin was really good with finding an answer, taking out the Skirk Prospector. I'm surprised he also didn't take out the Dark Dweller Oracle, but I guess he was trying to hope for his opponents to have an answer as well. Fred's Empress Galina deck was interesting. I think it's mono blue mill, and I'm surprised he didn't activate his commander to try and steal Krenko from me. I guess at that point I had so many tokens, it didn't really matter. I think Charles's Chulane deck is probably one of the few that I actually don't mind. Chulane is typically very straightforward and simple in the sense that it runs a lot of mana dorks to help power him out, and then just basically bounce them back to your hand to draw cards, and then flood the board, and then usually win with like a Crater Hoof. This was a nice refreshing change, and I actually kind of love seeing Oath of Druid, and I'm hoping to pick one up to put in some of my other decks. Sadly for Corwin, Xyris really didn't get a chance to shine, and I think it's because his playgroup knows how dangerous it is. I believe it's based around making a lot of snakes, so that Stoneforge Masterwork was going to power something up very quickly, and he was going to start smashing face himself. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.